Hello fungi friends, we're going to cook some mushrooms. I've got a fantastic selection of mushrooms on the board. I have these big, beautiful king trumpets, Pleurotus eryngii. Good taps on those. This is possibly the most massive one I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, look at that. That's insane. Like, the grip on that is just wild. But it's a really big, fatty mushroom. We're going to turn these into sort of a vegan scallop. I'm going to cut across it, do some cross hatching, sear them off, and I'll show you the secret of how I finish them. That looks pretty good, eh? So, I've also got some chicken of the woods on the board here. This is Latiparus gilbertsonii. It is the western chicken of the woods. It is not held in as high regard as the eastern chicken of the woods species, sulphureus or cincinnatus, but this one grows on eucalyptus here in Napa in huge amounts, and I find if I cook it really well, it's still a pretty good edible mushroom. Although be aware, because about 1 in 10 people are allergic to chicken of the woods, and it can make them quite sick. Usually that just means throwing up, diarrhea, happening within about 20 to 30 minutes of consuming this mushroom. So you don't want to eat too much of this, just in case you happen to be sensitive. If you've eaten chicken of the woods before, you're probably good to go. But, you know, you never know. It's better to be safe than sorry sometimes. Here is a nice big plate of chanterelles. These are Cantharellus formosus, the Pacific golden chanterelle, and I found these growing in grass out on the California coast. So these I both foraged wild, this here in Napa, this out on the coast, and then these I got at the farmer's market from my friends at Far West Fungi. And they're really impressive. Big old mushrooms. So, let's get to doing some cooking. Move everything around here so you can see what's going on the board. All right. Let's see. I want to do the biggest, fattiest scallops, but let's save that one. All right, we'll do scallops with this guy. It's nice big mushroom. All right. So I hear a lot of people when I cut mushrooms, you'll hear them squeak. People always tell me I need to sharpen my knives, and I say, no, my knives are good and sharp. It just has a really interesting texture that's kind of squeaky on a knife. So for these types of scallops, I like to cut them pretty thick. Some nice little squeaks. There we go. Ooh, that was a good squeak. Okay, so I'll show you guys what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna take a slightly smaller knife. I'm gonna flip these up. I'm gonna do just some basic cross hatching. And I'm not cutting very deep. I'm only cutting, you know, 1/4 of an inch at most is kind of the goal. It's part of why I cut these thick though, so I can cut a little deeper, because when I sear them, it'll give them a very attractive look, and it helps the flavors kind of get in deeper on a big piece of mushroom like this. And, you know, you do a little like fancy on an angle kind of thing. Looks fancier when you cut stuff on a bias than if you just go straight up and down. And you don't have to be super picky about the distancing of the cuts. You know, I'm sure at a fancy restaurant you would get admonished for cutting these as recklessly and carelessly as I am, but I am my own fancy restaurant, so I get to at least use these little tips and tricks to make something taste and look really good. So I also be careful of your fingers as you do this. I just did these sort of king trumpet scallops as a cooking demo when I was in Arizona. I led a cooking demo for the North American Mycological Association Arizona foray that we did back in August. I also did a bunch of cooking and served a dish to 115 people. It was a dish that had king trumpets in it. I made these sort of Vietnamese style chicken pho meatballs. So they were a blended chicken meatball with a bunch of mushrooms in it. Morels, porcini. What else was in there? God, I put wood ears, king trumpets. There was matsutake. There's all sorts of stuff in there. They were really good. But I had some king trumpets left over from doing that dish, and so I used the king trumpets for my cooking demo when it was time to do that. And I basically showed people how to do this. And, you know, it's something you see periodically go viral on social media. But I do find that a lot of people haven't necessarily thought about mushroom butchery, because I think about it a lot. The way that you cut up or process a mushroom before you cook it will drastically affect its texture and flavor. In the same way that, you know, when you butcher meat differently, you know, ground meat is very different from a steak. They get a distinctly different eating experience. And the same goes for mushrooms. I don't think people really give that quite enough credence as they think about mushrooms, but the way that we prep our mushrooms definitely changes how they are perceived on the palate and in the mouth and, you know, by the diner, visually as well. So I'm just going ahead and kind of putting some cross hatches on parts of the cap because I can, and it's fun. Be careful I don't take out too many little chunks here. Okay. Oops. Okay. Put a couple of cuts in the very top. Just do a couple of lines across, just cause. Okay, cool. We got a big one all cut up. We're gonna go to my pan and get that going. So I have a cast iron on the heat here. I'm gonna let it warm up a little bit. Do I want to do one more scallop? Yeah, we'll do one more. Two more. So this is an excellent dish to do if you have vegans, vegetarians in your life, or if you just happen to like nice meaty mushrooms. You can definitely sear these mushrooms off in drippings, meat drippings, or, you know, stuff left over after cooking meat. But you don't have to. They're plenty good on their own. I do a lot with oyster mushrooms, or when I finish them with hoisin sauce, because mushrooms are really good with Asian flavors in general. And hoisin sauce is a high-impact fermented black bean sauce that tastes really good on some seared mushrooms. But you're going to kind of see my approach for cooking mushrooms in general demonstrated as part of this, which is why I made these as for a cooking demo, because it's a great opportunity to talk about how to cook mushrooms and kind of what the general approach is. And my way of cooking mushrooms flies in the face of the convention for cooking mushrooms, which always says to like not crowd the pan and use lots of butter and oil. And I'm going to tell you that I'm going to avoid using any butter or oil to start. I'm going to do what's called a dry sear, and I'm not going to worry about how many mushrooms I put in the pan because there being a little bit of liquid or moisture around them isn't what's going to stop them from getting really nice and brown, especially not if I do really good high heat here. So, hang on, I'm just getting my stuff all ready to cook. Make sure everyone can see everything. There we go. All right, you guys can see the pan, they can see the pan. That's nice and warm. So we're gonna put these in basically just dry. And I know this feels weird to a lot of people. I wouldn't do this with a stainless, or with a non-stick pan. I only do this with stainless or cast iron because I like getting it really hot. And non-stick pans have a coating that can burn if you heat them without, oil or stuff in them. Okay, there we go. Nice big chunks, sort of scallops in here. And we're gonna let these sear off. They're gonna be great. So often when I'm cooking mushrooms, my favorite implement to use is actually chopsticks, because you get a lot of, power over each particular mushroom. And, they keep your hands away from the heat. If you're frying anything, keeps your hands away from the oil. So I'm watching these start to kind of brown off a little bit. And I'm gonna flip them before they burn. Generally, mushrooms are pretty hard to burn, but because I'm doing this no oil in the pan, it can happen. So you want to be careful about managing your heat and paying attention to your mushrooms, which is what I'm doing now. Just trying to get a nice browning on each side before I go ahead and add fat to the pan. And this is important to do with mushrooms. It's less important for these king trumpets, which have been grown commercially and are quite dry overall, but if you do this with, say, chanterelles, you need to do this dry fry step, because mushrooms have a lot of water, need to render all that water first before you add oil or butter, and that's fundamental to this sort of dry fry method. And this will yield much better texture and flavor for your mushrooms down the road. I know it seems a little counterintuitive, but stick with me. We're going to do good things. So this is also where I like to add a little salt in the pan, help draw some of the moisture out of these mushrooms. Sometimes you can even use a spatula, kind of press them down, you hear them squeak a little bit. Okay, now that everything's been in the pan, getting a little sear on, we're going to put some neutral vegetable oil in, and not a lot, just enough to kind of start lubing up the pan. And then cut the heat down here a little bit, because I'm starting to get good searing on my mushrooms. And I want to just get a little bit of oil on all the mushrooms. Don't worry, we're going to use butter for anyone who's watching and saying, butter, butter, butter. It's coming. Thing is, butter burns, and I don't want to put the butter in too early because I'm still working with pretty high heat here. I'm trying to get a really nice brown crust on these, which I'm succeeding in doing. These are looking pretty good. Now when I get them really uniformly brown, before I add any butter to the party. They smell good. So searing them was really what develops the flavor. So I started on medium-high, now I'm down to about medium. And I might knock it down to about medium-low for when I go ahead and add the butter. So hopefully you can see why I wanted to cut them pretty thick when I did the cross-hatching, because the cross-hatching kind of pulls back as you cook them. Get a really nice meaty bite out of these king trumpets, which I love. So I know a lot of people out there are scared of mushrooms, but that's part of the purpose of my content, is to hopefully educate you on mushrooms so you can be less afraid of them and maybe more fascinated or interested by them. And then ideally also want to eat them and learn about how to identify them. And you know, I hope to kind of act like an ambassador for fungi, you know, akin to the Lorax. I speak for the fungi just like the Lorax speaks for the trees. Okay, you guys ready for the exciting part here? There we go. Throw a couple of cloves of garlic in. And here we go. There's some thyme. Good time to add a little extra salt here. Do not be afraid to season your mushrooms well. Mushrooms like to be well seasoned. Kind of like potatoes in that a little extra salt helps them taste their best. So yeah, the butter is starting to brown up really nicely, but that is a big part of why I didn't want to add it earlier. Because if the butter had been in here this whole time, it'd be burning. And while browning tastes good, burning does not. So that's why we're doing things in this order. Very specific. You want to get the best results possible. So I do recommend you follow the steps I'm laying out. Put a little sprig of rosemary around here too. Get a little extra herbiness in there. Oh lordy, that smells good. So I didn't cut up the garlic, I'm leaving it whole because I kind of wanted it to sort of like perfume the butter and flavor the the mushrooms without making them really sharp and garlicky. As much as I love that flavor, I want to just keep the garlic kind of a background accent. Just like, you know, when you sear a steak in butter, you baste a steak in butter, you get the garlic in there, and keeping it whole so it doesn't burn up on me. Alright, that's looking pretty darn good. But wait, there's more. We're going to use a little bit of sherry here to just finish off. Sherry is a fortified white wine, so it's about 18% by volume, so it's a great cooking wine because it's shelf stable. It won't turn to vinegar because the alcohol is above 18%. And it is going to be really good to add a little bit of sweetness because this is like a cream sherry. So there's some sweetness and some acid, and it'll help solubilize all the brown bits off the bottom of the pan. I'll make a nice little sauce for these. So I'm using my spatula here to kind of scrape up the brown bits off the bottom, get everything tossed and turned, moved around, soak up all those layers of flavor we built up in the pan. The herbs, the garlic, the butter, the mushrooms. Oh man. Oh man. You know, serve this to any meat eater any day and they will be impressed. And serve this to a vegan or vegetarian and they'll lose their minds. And you can do anything you want flavor-wise. You can put a lot more, flavor oomph. I could be using some Cajun seasoning. I could be using fish sauce. You know, I could put some mole on here. Whatever you want. Whatever you do with a normal scallop or a chunk of meat, you can probably do to this mushroom. But for the time being, I'm going to leave it pretty simple. Turn the heat off here. I'm going to do one last little sprinkle of salt. And this is what I do often when I cook mushrooms. I'll do sort of 3 seasoning steps. So one right when they go in the pan for the dry fry, another time when I add the neutral oil, and then sort of one more big hit of salt at the end or around the time I add the butter. So I turn the heat off, but this is a cast iron pan, so there's a lot of residual heat capacity in it. And I'm just going to kind of keep turning these around for a minute or two until they cool down just a bit and until I really achieve that beautiful golden brown on all sides of these mushrooms. And I turn the heat off because, you know, there's butter in here now and it's more likely to burn than it was before. So I'm just trying to make sure that this all gets cooked in there without getting bitter or acrid because I burnt something. So I'll do a quick taste test for you in a minute. I just got to let this cool down. See, what piece do we want to eat, huh? Other great thing is there's sort of, you know, bits of stuff on the bottom of the pan. You can use one of these a little bit like a sponge to just soak up all that flavor and that browning on the bottom of the pan. Yeah. All right, let's try out the scallop. Give it a shot. You guys think it's going to be good? I do think it's gonna be hot though, so I'm taking a minute or two to cool this down before I burn my tongue. Ooh. Mmm. Oh, yum. Yeah. Oh my god. It is so sweet and delicious. And doing the cross hatching actually makes it more tender. Sometimes if you took a chunk of mushroom this big, it would still be delicious after cooking, but it would still be kind of tough, like a really big piece of meat. So this is a little bit like when you have cube steak and they use mechanical disruption to make a cube steak more tender. I did the same thing to a mushroom. But it's really sweet, really nutty. It has a very mild mushroom flavor. It's mostly just tastes like butter and salt and sherry and garlic and the herbs that I cooked it in. So this is also a great dish and preparation to make for someone who doesn't love mushrooms, as it's a mushroom that's not very mushroomy. Instead, it's very meaty, a very sweet, delicious. God, it's nothing like a vegetable either. It makes me so angry when people count mushrooms as vegetables. No, you cook mushrooms more like meat, sort of, but they can certainly stand up to flavors and provide more texture like meat can compared to a vegetable. But they're really, really good. They were actually texturally relatively similar to a scallop. If anything, they're a little bit tougher than a really well-cooked scallop, but like a crappy scallop that's kind of tough. They have a texture that's not that dissimilar, but that's why I do the cuts to make them more tender. Wow. There's even fibers inside the mushroom that feel kind of slippery, like when you eat meat and there's muscle fibers in the meat. So it's part of what makes mushrooms such a phenomenal sort of substitute or complement to meat, is that the mushrooms have a very similar texture and they'll take on the flavor of the meat when you cook them. Or, you know, in this case, they just take on the flavor of all the delicious stuff I cooked them with. Wow. That's exceptional. Yummy. Okay, well, you guys got to try this. Wow. Go ahead. Come on. Focus. Well, go ahead and give this a try yourself. This is such an incredible way to cook mushrooms. Big fan of it. Okay. Cheers. Goodbye.